All across America and around the world, this is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. Today's interviews are both timely and interesting. We're in a point, we're back in a war in the Middle East. There's a lot of talk about the Secretary of War and his invoking of Christianity. Obviously, in the Middle East, there are Muslims and Jews fighting. So we talk to two Marines now out of the service, talking about their experiences in war and sort of the dichotomy of war and the inner wounds that result. And they take it from a Christian perspective. I think you're going to find these interesting. One's the son of a pastor. That's a whole nother story. But stick around and listen in. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Marine Landon Longrear, who spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, came out as a sergeant, did tours over in Afghanistan, which we're going to talk about, and authored a book called U.S. Marines at the Battle for Sangin during Operation Enduring Freedom. The book covers right behind him and over his head, as is his beautiful wife. Landon, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, it's a very interesting and different sort of book about being over there and fighting in the sandbox, because you grew up with certain groundings in Christianity, a recognition of consciousness and what's right and wrong, and a soul. And this really put all of that to the test, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But how did a high school kid like you down in Texas find his way into the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I all throughout my upbringing, it was always very apparent to me that serving in the military was an honorable thing. From a Christian background, a major tenet of the Christian faith is that the greatest of the Christian faith are servants. They're servant-hearted. The example that Jesus set is that he came to serve, not to be served. And so as a part of being an American and reaping the benefits that generations of those that have gone before us worked hard and sometimes fought wars over to provide for us, the way of life, the freedoms and liberties, the benefits of industry and prosperity. And it was always apparent to me that the day would come that it would be my responsibility to take up the mantle and make sure I continue our way of life forward and do my part, however that looks. And that doesn't always mean military service for some, but it did for me. I always felt that it was my duty to serve. And I always wanted to. I can't really remember a time that I ever didn't want to join the military. 9/11 happened when I was in seventh grade. And while I like, couldn't fully appreciate the gravity of that situation in my 13-year-old mind, I knew it was important. But I think more important than that is that everything that followed, from the early air bombing campaigns in Afghanistan to the invasion of Iraq, which is a separate issue, but back then, as a kid, I always felt was connected. And then the ground battles that followed in Afghanistan, all of that was during my formative years. And I just understood at the time, in a very simple and fundamental way, that we were fighting on behalf of freedom. We were defending our way of life against people that were attacking and killing us, that hated our way of life. And we were liberating masses of oppressed people into the same, giving others across the world an opportunity to live their lives free of the unwanted control of others. And it was that simple for me. It
Well,
was.
and part of that too is when you went in, you knew what you were going into.
That's right.
This wasn't, I went in peacetime and I wasn't expecting that I might end up in war as a Marine rifleman. You knew where you were going to end up, and you end up in Afghanistan and in Sagaing province on a quick response force. Mm-hmm. And the book really takes the reader through how this impacted you at the core. You write about this tension between violence and restraint, and the beauty of the province, and the knowing that beauty is tied to poppies and opium. I mean, talk about this dichotomy and tension issue that seems to run throughout the book.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I don't know that I could certainly feel the tension, maybe the dichotomy or the bifurcation. Just the paradox of it all is that it was both good and bad in so many ways, and that really came out through the writing. I remember getting to the point that the manuscript was more or less pretty well formed, and just kind of realizing that, like, when you're writing a paper in high school or in college, you're taught to take a position, hold a thesis, and defend it, and maybe give some counter arguments, but kind of stay in that position. And once I got well into writing, I realized, like, I don't really have a strong position on whether this was a good or bad experience. It was both. And I don't think you can get away from that. Some of the best of humanity comes out in wartime experiences. People really step up to the plate. The technological advances that come during that time period, the heroics on the battlefield, the lengths that men and women will go to protect their fellow Marines or fellow soldiers. I mean, the courage that it takes for somebody to run out into the middle of a street under a hail of gunfire to pull their buddy off the ground that was just shot and wounded and will die if not for that aid. I mean, it's just some of the absolute best of humanity comes out, but it's ultimately on this bedrock of brutality, of human on human brutality, which is just tragic. Even in justified wars, when they have to be fought because you have a tyrannical enemy that is not going to stop unless somebody stops them, it's still tragic. And so I felt that. I felt it all the way through. I acknowledge that back then, the war in Afghanistan, it was that we were the good guys. Like, this was a just war. There were people that, for the preceding decades, had attacked and killed innocent people that culminated on the bombings of the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11th of 2001, and we had to do something about it. In addition to that, the atrocities that were occurring in Afghanistan at the time for just the local populace, they were terrible. During that time in Afghanistan, it was a warlord-run country. There was no centralized government. There were 7 predominant historical tribes that were in the nation, and it was the strongest survive. And there was raping and pillaging all throughout. And our opportunity to go in and create some stability and security and give people the opportunity to again live freely was worth doing. But it was ultimately on this bed of human on human brutality. So I always felt that tension. I don't think that war was ever a part of God's intent for humanity, and the burdens of war that we now have to carry, they're painful. They're still painful at times. I've been able to grow and mature and age out of some of that stuff and move on in life, but the burden still weighs on me at times. So I just it's some of the best.
Let me put some timing context on this, because it's
Sure.
2011 when you get to Afghanistan,
Mhm.
a full 10 years before we pull out of there in a chaos method mode. So that gives people an idea of like how the lack of central government existed that decade before.
Right.
And also, let me put some context around your growth. I mean, you get out, you go on, you get out of the Marine Corps, you go to pick up your Bachelor's of Art from Dallas Baptist University in Biblical Studies. You then pick up a Master's of Science in Business from there as well. You get married, raise a family. So you have this separation between that 2011 period when you experienced it and being a much more mature, as you said, and kind of grow out of it when you start writing. But writing forces you to go back and relive these experiences, and that's not easy to do.
Right.
Before we get into some specific experiences, explain to veteran radio listeners, Langdon, who may not know what a QRF is.
Yeah, QRF is a quick reaction force, and so it's just a quick reaction or quick response. I think fundamentally, a quick reaction force is a ready to go in a moment's notice force to come to the aid of another unit that's in duress that needs reinforcements, or to respond very quickly to any number of incidents that are happening within a strategic area of operation. And so we were on call in a moment's notice. Think about like maybe a firehouse, how firemen they have to be kitted up and in the truck and rolling out in 2 to 3 minutes whenever the sirens run off. That's kind of how a quick reaction force operates. We were either stationary, ready to go in moments notice, or we were out on the road. The predominant amount of our combat experience in Sangam, we were out. We were out on a strategic route within this highly contested area of Sangin, this very tumultuous battle space. And we tried to have presence outside the wire, kitted up in the trucks, ready to respond to anything that came our way, again, in a moment's notice. And so sometimes that was responding to, well, go ahead. Go ahead,
Well,
Jim.
and what I would point out to our listeners is that what that means is what you're going to end up seeing is sort of, there's already stuff going down.
That's right.
It's already a hot situation when QRF's called out and rolls in. So that puts some context on sort of the adrenaline and the mindset that QRF has to have, because you're being called out to, hey, an IED's just gone off, or this battles, gunfights going on. We need to get some backup.
That's right.
And you talk a little bit about that sort of, am I excited or am I ashamed?
Yeah.
Expand on that a little bit.
It's hard not to get excited. I liken the experience in some ways, and it is it's a really good way to think about it. To being on a sports team. When you're playing football growing up, you're with your team, you're expecting your guys to operate within their positions and do what they're supposed to play by play, and they're expecting you to do the same. You really count on each other, and you're going up against an opposing force that's doing everything that they can to stop you. And we are working out, trying to get in shape, trying to get strong, trying to get tough, and playing against this opposing force, and we're trying to beat them. And that's an exciting thing. I think it just scratches something within our internal makeup as human beings, just the competition in general. So thinking about it from that standpoint, while much more violent and much more extreme, in life or death, training in the military, we're training to go up against opposing forces. And a part of the Marine Corps mentality, especially in the lower ranks in the infantry, we understand the broader strategy. We understand the commander's intent. We understand the strategic initiatives to an extent of what's going on in a war effort at any given time. But the lower ranks don't focus on that. Our focus is on winning battles. And now in the context of Iraq, Afghanistan, there was the COIN mission. Like, it was much more muddy than just force on force engagement. But fundamentally, it's just winning battles. Do your job really well and make sure you're the one that survives it, not the enemy. And so getting into these combat engagements for a young Marine, it's like the pinnacle milestone to achieve in the Marine Corps. Everything around the Marine Corps ultimately boils down to and evolves around winning wars, which means killing the enemy. That's what's ingrained in you from day one. That's the purpose of the Marine Corps. It's the purpose of the military force, is to win wars. That's a part of the indoctrination from day one. And the mentality of combat forces is ultimately, again, just evolves around winning in combat. And so,
and as a young Marine, because that's what you are at that point. You're just out on the tip of the spear here with at some point after you have had some of these experiences, you can feel maybe a change in yourself, and you write, how do I keep my heart from hardening?
That's right.
And was that a reflection that you had at the time, or a reflection that you had looking back?
No, that was a reflection that I had at the time. I think the struggle of being a Christian at war is, from a biblical perspective, all of humanity are children of God. I think that the way that God feels about humanity in general is the way that we feel about our own children. I think that Genesis says that we're made in His image and likeness. I think our relationships on earth are reflections of the way that He feels about us. And while, again, there are justifiable reasons for engaging in combat, especially in a defensive posture. It's getting excited about competing against this opposing force that ultimately results in the deaths of human beings. There's a tragedy to it. I think the struggle for me was not engaging in combat, but was the emotional toll and the moral wear and tear. It may be hard to imagine, but in Sangin in particular, which was the most kinetic combat operating zone in the nation at the time, it was a daily struggle for us versus them. It wasn't this game set match where it was like, okay, we're going to meet on Friday on this battlefield. We don't really know a whole lot about you. You don't know a whole lot about us. We're just going to go up against each other and see how it goes. We're daily studying them and hunting them and trying to figure out what they're doing and why, where their weak points are, where their strong points are, what their motivations are, what their strategic initiatives are, so that we can combat them. They're doing the same thing to us. It gets very personal. As showcased in the book, the way that our deployment started, we were getting hit a lot with IEDs, and we weren't able to hit back because the enemy was fighting a guerrilla warfare tactic, and they weren't wanting to go head to head with us. And for right reason, we had a major upside in a lot of ways, but it started getting really personal. And I think the struggle from a heart posture standpoint is starting to feel a good amount of hatred and bloodlust. You get hit. We hear about other friendly forces that are getting hit, guys that are dying and being killed against this enemy that's actively hunting us. You start feeling a lot of very aggressive hatred towards those other human beings.
And you had the book recounts, you developed real personal relationships with those that you're in combat with, and
of course
you lost folks like Doc Rast and Sergeant Smith. There are both enemy fire instances discussed, but also friendly fire instances discussed, and drone attacks that go wrong. All of this has to be swirling in your consciousness as long as you allow it in. I think some guys coped by blocking everything out, they lost their moral compass. They had to, or better put, they had to put their moral compass aside in order
Right.
to survive. But what I really got out of reading here is, as those tragedies occur, your moral compass was active and swinging.
It really impacted me. You're right. Some guys are able to disassociate a little bit easier than others. Maybe my emotional makeup is just a little bit more pronounced than some. I felt all of it, and there are moments. Most of the time, you can just disassociate, keep it professional. Do what you're trained to do. And a major part of Marine Corps training, any combat training ahead of actual combat, is repetition, extreme amounts of iteration, so that when you get in those environments, you're more reactive without thinking about it. You kind of develop some subconscious muscle memory on how to respond to certain situations. But there are times that it does get emotional and that it does get personal. And, you mentioned the word shame. I think the only shame that I really felt heavily outside of just the heart tug on just the tragedy of war was wanting to kill people. I just didn't want destruction on others. I was okay with the war as it was, perfectly fine being there, completely okay killing. The times that I really struggled is whenever I sought it out, is whenever it got so personal, and the vengeance and retributional mentality started taking over. That was my struggle. I think from a moral standpoint, I didn't ever get to the point that I got just outlandishly, vengeful to the point that, the rails were off completely and we would just go killing everybody. Like there's never anything like that. It was always battlefield, enemy force on force. But again, I tried to stay professional and not emotional. Just wasn't always able to do that.
The book is U.S. Marines at the Battle for St. John. We're talking to Landon Longrear, who did 8 years in the Marine Corps, got out in 2015, is now in the commercial brokerage space. Life is pretty good at the moment. But the book also talks about that transition struggle, right? That when you get out and the loss of the brotherhood that you've so developed. And so there's go read the book to capture some of that, and maybe it'll help understand what either you're going through or somebody is going through. But there was one section of the book we've got to talk about before we run out of time. And it's relative to Garcia, one of the guys you're with, and sort of reactions back home during go ahead and tell this story. I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah, sure. It's an amazing story. And I remember the conversations that I had with Garcia when it happened. I'll just tell the story, then I'll give my thoughts on it. Alfredo Garcia was a Marine that I went through boot camp with. And we ended up at the same unit, and we ended up on that deployment together. And he was my best friend. Loved all the guys that I deployed with, and in a real sincere way, depended on them, and we developed such tight-knit bonds, whether we wanted to or not. But me and Alfredo were tight. Well, toward maybe the later half of the deployment, we were we left Sangin. We were in a place called Delaram in the Farah province at the time, but it's over on kind of the western part of Afghanistan, southwestern part, up against the border of Iran. And we're fighting the opium trade. We're trying to stop poppy plants from exiting Afghanistan and getting into Iran, where it could be cultivated and refined into heroin and other pharmaceuticals, and then shipped out to the rest of the world. During that time, the opium trade was producing roughly 50% of the Taliban's annual funding. So we're trying to cut that revenue stream off. Well, Alfredo was in the turret of a lead truck, 4 trucks total, on a pretty standard patrol out in the middle of the desert. They happened to be very, very far away from the forward operating base that we were stationed at. and they were just doing a standard presence patrol. I don't recall if there was any strategic intent behind that patrol or not, but they were out. On that particular patrol, they were on their way back to the fob. They had already found and neutralized at least one IED. There might have been two. And they, end of the day, they were feeling relatively successful and headed back. Well, Alfredo in the turret of the lead truck, which means he's faced forward, he starts to feel this real heart tug, if you will. One of the things that we had talked about in Sangan all the time was that sometimes the Holy Spirit burdens us for important reasons. In particular, we always said, if you ever feel the Lord really tugging on your heart to pray for protection, you should pray for protection. And Alfredo had a moment like that. And he said he just felt something really strong come on, like something was about to happen. And so he starts praying for protection. Well, they're patrolling and he's in the lead truck and they're probably pacing at 10 to 15 miles an hour, maybe less. And Alfredo said 60 seconds roughly after that burden hit him and he started praying, a huge explosion went off behind him. And it was the second truck in the patrol had hit a huge 120-pound IED and flipped the truck over, set it on fire, and a fiasco occurred. Ensued after that, which is detailed in the book heavily. And without going through all of the details for time constraint, when we try to figure out how to shorten this up, I went out as a.
So let me jump in to shorten it up a little bit because this stopped me when I was reading it to make my notes, which was. You get back and his wife has emailed what happened and are you okay?
Yeah.
She in turn had heard from somebody at her church service where this woman approached her and said, something bad has happened to your son, but the Lord wants to tell you that he protected him and that he's going to be okay. This is halfway around the world.
Yeah. It was. Whenever we got back, Alfredo was really mixed up and he came and told me about it. And I had been out there as a part of the response to help those guys. And so we're sitting out there all night long, but in different trucks and hadn't talked. But he told me whenever that explosion occurred, he was facing forward in his turret. Right after he got done praying, he said that he saw what he said was the brightest white light he's ever seen in his life come down out of the sky, embrace him, come down towards him, embrace him, and then shoot into that truck behind him. And he was really mixed up about that. He wasn't really sure how to interpret that experience, but he just had this heart tug. He prayed for protection. He obviously had some form or fashion of a premonition that something was about to happen, which he and I would associate as being like a God moment. And then he saw this bright white light out of the sky come down and shoot into that truck. And so afterwards, he's not sure how to interpret this. Like you said, we get back 5 hours later. He goes to the computer center and there's an email in his inbox from his mom who at a church service the very day before, while it had happened, before she ever could have found out about it from us, she was freaked out that something had happened. He got her on the phone and she said, a woman in a church service, a prophetic woman, came up to me and said, something bad has happened to your son, but the Lord wants you to know that he protected him. And now, the experience is validated halfway around the world, like you said, in the most incredibly profound way. Alfredo had an angelic encounter after this divine burden to pray for protection. And as it would happen, of the guys in the vehicle, 5 of them, at least 4 that I know of, were Christians in a real way. And the explosion should have killed all of them, but every single one of them survived. Some maimed for the rest of their life.
I got to this point in the book, which is towards the back, and make sure you read it all the way through page 169 to get to Garcia's story.
Yeah.
The subtitle on this should have been Christian Warriors or something. It's very, as I say at the outset, there's a lot of books about battles and guys and whatnot. What I found very interesting, Landon, is that you were candid, open about the role that your religious beliefs played throughout and how it played throughout with other folks.
Yeah.
And happy to hear about how well you're doing now and the service that you gave to the country. I appreciate the time that you've given us here on Veterans Radio. I wanted to get you here and see a story, so thanks for doing that. But yeah, really happy to have you on Veterans Radio and tell your unique story of being a Marine in Sangin Province.
You bet, Jim. Yeah, I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate what you do to just kind of showcase war stories. It's really important and it's meaningful. So thank you for the work that you do.
We're going to hear from a pastor's son who became a Marine and ultimately found his way to being a pastor himself and being the co-founder of Mighty Oaks Foundation. We'll get into that right after these messages.
Military veterans touch everyone's life. I'm guessing right now you're thinking of a veteran, a close friend, relative. Maybe it's you. Even the toughest of us sometimes need help, but don't know where to turn for support. You don't need special training to help a veteran in your life. Even small actions can make a world of difference. If you know a veteran in crisis, please call the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. A message from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today, Jeremy Stalnecker. He is the CEO of the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which we're going to talk about. But he's also a Marine, and we're going to talk a little bit about his military career. Mm-hmm. Jeremy, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Well, it's an interesting story from being a badass Marine to a badass pastor, Christian pastor. So we got to talk the whole transition. You are out in California, and I've read that, when you were a kid, you wanted to join the Marines. Tell us why. Tell us about your Marine career.
Yeah, so I was raised in a pastor's home, and my dad and mom were great. Started a church here in Southern California, and I always preface this for the Christians in the audience. I never felt like I was running from God, but I certainly did not think that I was called to do what my parents were doing.
And I am sure as a kid, nobody thought you'd ever end up a pastor because you were probably the bad pastor's son.
Yeah, I was, I tried to not get in trouble. I won't say I didn't do anything wrong, but I was pretty savvy. And so I didn't get in trouble a lot. But no, I remember going to my dad when I was, 14 years old and saying, "Hey, Dad, I really don't think that God wants me in ministry." That's what you're supposed to say when your dad's a pastor. And so I don't think God wants me in ministry. He said, "What do you think, God wants you to do?" And I said, "I think he wants me to enlist in the Marine Corps." He's like, "There's no way God wants you to enlist in the Marine Corps. That's not God you're listening to." And so we talked, and he's like, "Look, if that's really what you want to do, we'll help you get there. And but we want you to go to college first." And
was there a military history in the family?
Going back, my grandfather enlisted in the Army when he was 17 and fought in Europe in World War II. But it wasn't something that he even really talked about. It was just kind of something he had done. So no, not really a military history. I will say my dad is and was very patriotic, really believed in American ideals and, what America stands for around the world. And so even though he hadn't served, he was very much about service.
Well, we have often heard people say, and I've certainly said this, that if you enjoy certain freedoms, like freedom of religion,
right, thank
a veteran.
Sure.
So Dad says college first, which you do on the way to the officer training for the Marine Corps?
Yeah. So I had to go to college, and, my parents picked the college. It was a very conservative Christian college. And so People say, how do you pick your major? Well, I picked mine by opening the catalog and trying to find the easiest possible course that I could study for 4 years. So I saw that they had a criminal justice program. Like, cops, man, I like cops. That sounds pretty fun. So let's do that. So, I got through a criminal justice program, but in the process, learned about commissioning sources, and the Marine Corps had a great commissioning program that I could go through while I was in college, and I did. And so I was commissioned as a second lieutenant coming out of college. Went through, there's a couple of schools that you have to go through, but ended up becoming an infantry officer, which for me was a dream come true, And
put the time frame on this, Jeremy, because it leads to where your tours took you.
Yeah, so graduated from college in 99. I was commissioned in 99. Served with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines here in California at Camp Pendleton, part of the 1st Marine Division. I did a few deployments. Notoriously, I deployed with the 31st MEU, which has been on the news recently. They just deployed to near Iran, which is unusual for that deployment. But typically, that's in Japan and Australia. We had a great time, came back. It was a peacetime Marine Corps. And then 9/11 happened and the world changed. The war in Afghanistan kicked off. And then eventually, our battalion, along with the 1st Marine Division, was sent to Kuwait in January of 2003. And March 19th. So we're on that time right now. March 19th and 20th, 2003. Our battalion breached the berm. We're the Marine Infantry Battalion that breached the berm between Kuwait and Iraq and went into the country.
Yeah. So this is as you say, you transition from peacetime Marine, which was kind of probably fun, to, oh my goodness, we're in conflict now. It's a whole different story.
Yeah.
How is your internal clock working? Because you're son of a pastor, Christian faith's important, and now it's a different mission that the Marines are sending you on.
Yeah. It's funny. So, I'm almost 50. I'll be 50 this year. I have 2 adult kids and 2 teenage kids. And I look at the world very differently from this end than I did from that end. When I was a Marine infantry officer, platoon commander, we're deploying to Iraq. For me, that was like I had gotten called up to, the major leagues. That was the thing we had planned for and trained for, the thing I read about when I was a little kid, and really what I dreamed about when I said I want to be a Marine. And so for me on that end of it, it's funny to say, but I had very little conflict. I remember my mom pulling me aside before we deployed and said, "Hey, I just want to know, do you believe in the mission? This is important to me to know that you really believe in what you're doing." And I just gave her, kind of a dumb, like, "What are you talking about? It doesn't matter. I'm a Marine. This is what we do." And really, when we got there and the tracers started coming back our direction, so we're in active combat, super crazy, very surreal. Things are happening around you that you've been told your entire life aren't supposed to happen. However, we had been training for years in these scenarios. And so you just go through the process of doing what your training has taught you to do. So very, very different than now. I have a police officer's son and I worry about him all the time and he doesn't get it either. Right. And so I think when you're young and you've been training and preparing for something, you do it and it feels very normal.
As you went through that deployment in combat overseas, and you have to always put this in kind of a larger world context because you're doing one thing on the ground here, but you're hearing about everything going on the ground over there.
Yeah.
A lot of guys end up feeling like they have some moral or soul injury from the conflicts that they find themselves in versus, maybe what they learned or were taught or just absorbed growing up. As you were over there, was there some sort of tug of war going on? Like, man, this doesn't really fit together, or how did that work for you?
We went to Iraq, and people listening remember this under kind of the pretext of weapons of mass destruction, and again, a lot of the same things we're hearing right now. And we could argue, I guess, whether or not any of that was real. But what was real when we got to Iraq and we got into the country was that the Saddam Hussein regime was oppressing, torturing, stealing from the people that lived there. And as we moved village to village, people were happy we were there because we were running off the soldiers, and we were running off those folks who were taking everything from them. I mean, we'd roll through the countryside and there were fields that were plowed, ready to be planted, but there was no water. We talked to farmers who say, I can't get water. It's been cut off. We have to buy it, but we don't have the water to plant the crops, to get the money to buy the water. And so their families are starving. And so as we went through that, and again, when I went, it was a very different time. Things changed after we left. But when we first went into the country, we were the first Marine Infantry unit into the country. We started to make our way toward Baghdad. Honestly, I felt very, I don't know what the word is. Righteous would be very strong, but it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like as Americans, we have a call to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves, defend those who can't defend themselves. And that's exactly what we were doing. So I don't think we went there to do what we were told we were going to do. But I do think in the process, we were helping people who had been oppressed for a very long time. And so when we talk about things like moral injury, and again, when I was there, it was very kinetic. We were fighting largely soldiers in uniforms. Later on at my time there, we weren't. But it was never, it was not what a lot of things happened. Afterwards, it was a lot of city fighting and door-to-door stuff, and a lot of other things happened. That really wasn't our war in our time. But yeah, man, it's different. And I think every deployment's different. I think every experience is very different. But I didn't feel that.
You said at the outset, hey, I told my dad, the pastor, I don't think God's calling me to the ministry. But somewhere along the line, you start feeling the call.
Yes. Yeah, God will get you one way or the other, right? You can't run for very long. And it was a lot of things. We believed that us going to Iraq meant the war was going to be over very quickly. In fact, we were told, mission accomplished, right? So I had been in the peacetime Marine Corps. I went through that process, and the thought of going back to that was not anything that I wanted to be a part of. I was married. I had 2 little kids. And so it just seemed like the right time to get out. I did what I had always wanted to do. And the church that we were attending at the time, our pastor came to me and said, hey, if you decide to get out of the Marine Corps, I've got a job for you. I know you don't have a Bible degree. You didn't go to seminary. I won't have you teach and do that kind of stuff, but I need a leader, and we need someone who can help oversee some of these projects. And so it seemed like a very safe, very soft place to land after the Marine Corps. It turns out that wasn't the case, but that is what it felt like at the time.
It was really a step on a slide that slid you down, if you will, to be fully immersed in Christian leadership and focus. So you go from sort of just a staff member to an assistant pastor, ultimately becoming a senior pastor in a Bay Area Baptist church.
Yeah.
And along the way, you are counseling folks. Is it primarily focused on veterans and first responders at that point in your life, or is it really a broader, I guess I'll call it civilian ministry?
Yeah. So the church that we went to work for when I was, an assistant pastor, an associate, we were there for 5 years. It was a church that we had attended, I think, 4 miles from the gates of Camp Pendleton. So a lot of military couples, a strong military culture. And because I was the military guy on staff, I was given the role of, hey, you need to counsel these young couples who are having a hard time in their marriage. I didn't have any training in counseling or experience. And, oh, by the way, my marriage was falling apart. But I started working to figure it out and try to help as many people as I could. But the transition about killed us. And so in that process, and I could talk all day about that, but in the process of kind of healing and restoration and getting back on my feet, I put as much distance between myself and the military as I possibly could. And so I ended up pastoring a church actually in the San Francisco area, not a strong military presence. And and just kind of tried to forget that I had been in the Marine Corps, putting as much distance from that kind of pain and transition and hurt and loss and confusion as I possibly could.
That's not an unusual story, right? I mean,
No.
I've talked to so many veterans here on Veterans Radio, and we're talking to Jeremy Stalnecker, who's the CEO of Mighty Oaks Foundation, which I promised listeners we'll get to. But you talk to guys in those first 3, 4, 5 up. I say to a lot of folks, it takes about 6 years to work through it all. That's what you were doing, right? You were kind of working through. I took off the uniform. I got all this stuff up in the attic that I'm not sure how to deal with.
Yeah.
And you referenced, hey, I'm having a tough family life because of this, my marriage. I mean, that's kind of typical stuff, isn't it?
It's very typical. The transition is something, 2003, no one was talking about. But that, man, it damages more lives and families and marriages than just about anything else. A lot of what we see on the other side of that, we could look at addictions and all the things we talk about. Those are kind of the consequence of that transition where you feel lost. I knew my job. I understood where I fell in the hierarchy. It all made sense. I was around other people doing the same thing. And now, literally from one day to the next, it's all gone. I was literally leading Marines in combat. We were in Baghdad. I'm leading Marines in combat. About a month later, 30 days later, I'm completely out of the Marine Corps, working on a church staff, doing a job I had never done before with people that didn't understand me and I didn't understand them. And it did not take long before I became so frustrated and angry that the bottom fell out. And so, yeah, it was a long process of figuring out who I am outside of the military, what it means to be a husband and a father, all of those things I had never really learned. So very common story. And thankfully for me, I had the right people in my life. I had a strong father. I had other men in my life that were not afraid to kind of get in my face and, course correct. I had a wife that loved me and was willing to deal with the craziness that I was dragging her through. And a lot of people just don't have that. And so you're right. It takes years often to recover and course correct and begin moving forward.
Yeah, and get back to where there's some semblance of, I really, now I'm going the right direction. And part of that story is important because too many guys give up in those first, I'll call it 6 years.
Yeah.
Whether they turn to addiction, they turn to suicide,
100%.
They turn to just, I'm gonna blow up every family relationship I have and I'm not putting them back together. You kind of have to get through to folks. There is another side. It may take 6 years, but you're going to get to the other side, and you're going to be a pretty happy, or much happier at least, camper when you get there. And if we look at your timetable, you moved to San Francisco, you pastored a church there, and somewhere along the line, tell us about the transition to involvement with Mighty Oaks Foundation.
Yeah, so about 10 years after I left the Marine Corps, and I had not stayed in contact with anyone, I had a Marine that I served with reach out to me, and he said, hey, I met this guy. He's starting this organization, and he's a Christian, you're a Christian. He's starting this thing for veterans, and he asked me to get some of the guys that we served with together and try to figure this thing out. And so he said, we've got 10 guys going up to Colorado. Would you come and be a part of that? And I said, sure. Again, hadn't talked to any of them, hadn't spent time with any of them. One of the kind of lies that we tell ourselves in that process of transition is I'm the only one who's felt this way. I'm the only one who's struggled like this or had these thoughts or, done these things. And I believe that. I believe there's something wrong with me. I was broken. And then 10 years later, I'm sitting around a fire with those guys that I had served with, and I start to hear stories about suicide, hear stories about broken homes and broken families. And it was like that was the moment the light came on for me. And I realized my service to these guys did not end when I put the uniform in the closet. I had people in my life who could help me get back up. They didn't have that. And so I need to continue to serve and continue to do whatever I can to help them. And, thankfully that's when I was able to get involved with Mighty Oaks. Mighty Oaks was just getting started and came along and that was 2012. We've been doing it ever since.
And it's important for folks to realize we're talking to, Jeremy Stalnecker here, who's, you already heard, college grad, Marine officer, Christian, pastor, and he's having these problems.
Yes.
Well, how is the regular enlisted guy who maybe didn't have the advantage of a strong dad or a college education or a wife and 4 kids? You really do have to reach out to the community and get help, don't you?
You absolutely have to have the right people in your life. Isolation will destroy you. And even though I had those people in my life and they got me back on my feet and I moved forward, I was still isolating. I just stopped talking about it. And I learned how to do the things I was supposed to do. I've told people before, it took me a year to get back on my feet and get moving. My wife has corrected me, even publicly, and said it took us about 10 years before we got to a place where we were actually doing well. And she'll tell the story of even me preaching and her listening and getting so angry because of what I was saying, knowing I didn't really live that out, and just a long process. But yes, you have to get around the right people who can call you out, who can point you in the right direction, who can encourage you, but also who have a similar story, so that the walls of people don't know what I've been through break and you're able to move forward in an actual meaningful way with people that do get it.
Well, and I think it helps to be able to see somebody who goes like, oh, he got through it.
Yep.
Maybe I can too. Maybe I need to ask the right questions or get the.
That's right.
When I get angry, do this versus that. What does Mighty Oaks Foundation do?
We do exactly what you just described. We have a program, and we have locations across the country where we'll bring groups of men or groups of women. We have separate programs. We'll bring them to one of those locations, and we spend 5 days talking about trauma, talking about a lot of these issues. But the folks who are teaching, the people who are leading, everyone who's a part of our program started as a student. So they came looking for help, looking for hope, looking for direction. They found it. Maybe they were in the middle of addiction or brokenness in their homes or whatever the case. But they found purpose. They found hope. They started moving forward. We bring them through a long process of leadership training. And now they're standing up in front of a class of people just like them. To your point, people who get it. And they can say, I know where you are because I've been there. I've struggled the same way you've struggled. I've hurt the same way that you've hurt. And I found hope on the other side of that. And I don't have it all figured out, but I want to help you get there too. And so it becomes very much peer-to-peer. It's not about a doctor telling a patient what he should do or a pastor to, a parishioner. It's a guy, man or woman, looking across the room and saying, we're exactly the same. I'm just a few steps ahead. And that makes all the difference in the world.
And there's a great website. It's Mighty Oaks Programs. Mighty
Programs,
Oaks Programs.org. Go to mightyoaksprograms.org. I hope you can find something you can relate to in both of these former Marines as they dealt with their Christianity, as they dealt with their struggles afterwards, and reaching out to help people now. So, again, you might want to read Landon Longrear's book, U.S. Marines at the Battle of Saigon, in Operation Enduring Freedom, or go to Mighty Oaks Foundation. I did it again. MightyOaksPrograms.org to get some more information. We want to use this remaining time to remind you that the Congressional Medal of Honor Society Convention will be held in Detroit from September 29th to October 3rd of 2026, featuring the largest gathering of living Medal of Honor recipients. The convention will bring together as many as 60 living Medal of Honor recipients for a series of public and private events. They'll be talking and promoting values of the Medal of Honor such as commitment, integrity, courage, sacrifice, citizenship, and patriotism. This convention really is a unique opportunity for the city and the state of Michigan to honor its military heroes and foster a spirit of patriotism and community engagement. You can learn more by going to medalofhonordetroit.com, and you can learn more about the Medal of Honor recipients by going to Congressional Medal of Honor Society site, cmohs.org. We also want to bring forward and thank a number of our local sponsors You heard earlier from the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System. We always appreciate their support. The National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, which certifies disabled and veteran-owned businesses. They've been a long-time supporter. And local folks like Vietnam Veterans of America, Charles S. Kettles, Chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara, Post 423, American Legion, Presscorn, Post 46, all of Ann Arbor. If you're not involved in your local VSO, take a look at them. They're not your grandfather's VSO anymore. They do a lot of good work. They are making this transitional change to veterans of the more recent era. So I think you'd find that a pretty interesting and different group if you reached out to them and said, what are you doing? How might my family get involved? I think it's still important to be connected to those who know what service is like. And that's really the story that ran through this discussion with Longrear and Stalnecker, both of them talking about how the importance of staying connected to the community of veterans. Your military service doesn't have to be the end of it. It should maybe be the start of something, and we really think that would be useful and important. If, again, a good place to start is with those sort of organizations. Nationally, we're also supported by the Vietnam Veterans of America. We're not minting any more Vietnam veterans, and that organization has done great work for decades, and it's now time for some of these other organizations to step it up and deal with veterans of a more modern age. We're really glad we're able to tell our stories here on Veterans Radio. Go to veteransradio.org, listen to our podcasts, certainly our weekly program that you're here listening to now on your radio stations. And as always, until next time on Veterans Radio, you are dismissed.